By the time the winter of 1944 settled over the Ardennes, the bunker felt less like a structure and more like something alive that had learned to inhale and exhale with its own slow rhythm, breathing in sync with every distant artillery burst that thudded through the forest above us. Each time those far-off shells landed, a thin veil of dust drifted down from the ceiling, as if the reinforced concrete was signing from the strain of holding the earth back. The cold down there didn't just bite, it seeped into everything, dulling our hands, flattening our voices, leaching warmth from skin and metal, until the whole room seemed carved from one uniform shade of gray. After enough nights on shift, I could tell the difference between every hiss, pop, and quiver in the equipment. The faint warble the transmitter made when drifting off frequency, the little rattle in the generator when its rhythm faltered for a heartbeat, the soft choke certain relays produced when moisture crept into the lines. My world had shrunk to that sound tape. Corporal Matthew Cole, United States Army Signal Corps, 29th Division, stationed in a concrete throat carved into a Belgian hillside, a place command designated Relay Station Echo 7, but the men quietly called the Crypt, because in that dark, stone belly, you heard more dead voices than living ones. My war wasn't fought with rifles or charges. My war lived inside headphones, pressed so tightly against my skull they left bruises. A universe of static, frantic call signs, fading coordinates, and final breaths swallowed by noise. The bunker itself was little more than a scar in the hill, a narrow entrance tunnel, sinking into a cramped room lined with bunks on one wall and radio gear on the other. Outside, the front twisted and recoiled, the German push swelling into what command would eventually name the bulge. But inside our concrete cave, the air tasted mostly of dampable blankets, burnt wiring, stale sweat, and that recognizable dusty metallic smell that clung to carbon microphones, no matter how often you cleaned them. 8 of us rotated through this hole, sleeping in snatches beneath a single red bulb that bathed the entire room in a dim, blood-tinted haze that made every shadow look like a wound. The generator's pulse set the tempo of our nights, steady until it sputtered. Then every man would look up at the flickering bulb, silently praying the power wouldn't die. If the power died, the radios died. And if the radios died, some unit out there walking blind through snow and artillery would die with it. The midnight to 0400 stretch always fell to me, those lonely hours when even the guns outside seemed exhausted, and the world narrowed to the faint scrape of branches brushing the entrance, and the eerie groaning of the forest shifting under winter's grip. Some nights the static was broken by desperate voices, forward observers whispering fire missions under duress, infantry squads calling danger close before their transmissions dissolved, or panicked operators from other stations whose final sentences clipped into silence. But most nights were just cold, slow, and empty, the kind of emptiness that made your own breathing sound too loud in your ears. December 17th began like that. Bitter cold, no wind, no movement topside, except the occasional tremor of distant armor rolling somewhere beyond our reach. The brass was shouting across frequencies they had no business using, trying to piece together fragmented reports of the German advance. I hunched over the table, with my field jacket pulled tight, fingers wrapped around a mug that had long since surrendered its last traces of heat. Behind me, Sergeant Webb snored with a wet, rattling rumble that blended with the generator's drone until it felt like both were vibrating in my teeth. The guard shift had sealed the entrance door to keep the cold out, locking us into a stale silence that made it easy to imagine we were the last men still breathing in that frozen stretch of Europe. I logged routine chatter in meat block letters. Times, units, bearings, nothing unusual, nothing worth remembering. Then, at 11:33, something shifted, not in the room, not in the forest, but in the static itself. Men who haven't worked radios long never understand this, but after enough hours listening to the ether, you learn its texture, the way a hunter reads ground or a sailor reads waves. You know when something touches it. The background hum thickened, dense and heavy, as if the air on the other end of the frequency had been wrapped in wet cloth. The hairs on my forearm lifted. I leaned forward and nudged the dial, tightening the signal until a faint clicking emerged beneath the static. Steady, patterned, not random. A carrier wave, a voice trying to break through. At first it came as a smear of sound, only half formed. I keyed the mic and gave the standard request. Station calling Echo 7. Repeat your call sign, over. My own voice sounded brittle in the headphones, dim and papery. The clicking steadied, the static thinned. Then a man's voice, weak, frayed, but unmistakably human, pushed through the noise. This is Corporal Matthew Cole, Signal Corps, serial number 35172409. My name, my rank, my serial, my cadence, my voice. For a full second I sat frozen, the pencil in my hand hovering uselessly over the open logbook. The generator thumped once, almost like it flinched. The voice continued, urgency threading every syllable. Echo 7, Cole, you need to listen. Write this down. Every instinct told me this was impossible. Some form of fatigue hallucination, some cruel trick, but I followed protocol because protocol was the only thing keeping my mind from cracking clean in half. I logged the time and the impossible claim in a tight, shaking script. I tried to study my breathing. I keyed the mic again, demanding location and nature of distress, but the voice only grew more frantic. Nat, check the timestamp. Look at the clock. I looked. 0:11 6 hours. I repeated the reading aloud as if doing so would anchor me to reality. The voice inhaled sharply on the other end. 72 hours ahead of you. Same station, same room, same you. Don't open the bunker door. The clock ticked once, loud enough to echo. And for the first time since arriving at Echo 7, I realized how truly alone we were beneath that frozen hill, cut off from everything except whatever was speaking to me with my own mouth, through a machine that should never have carried a voice from anywhere but the present. For several long seconds after the final knock, I held myself utterly still, lungs refusing to draw even a shallow breath, the weight of the bunker's cold air pressing against my ribs like a second uniform. The static in the headphones didn't just whisper, it seemed to thin into something almost sentient, a low, velvety hum that curled close to my ear, as though someone were leaning in to murmur directly into it. My pencil hovered above the logbook, trembling, refusing to commit the moment to paper, as if writing it down would make the impossible undeniably real. Because no matter how desperately I tried to rationalize what I'd heard, the truth caved in on me. The voice claiming to be me, my cadence, my breath, my serial, spoke with the urgency of a man who knew his own death was tapping at the door. Yet the impossibility of it gnawed at me just as hard. Radios carried distance, not time. Signals didn't fold backward through hours like pages turning in reverse. And yet every drop of dread running down my spine insisted the voice believed its own message. That terrified me more than the content of the warning itself. But instinct forced my fingers back into motion. I scribbled the entry, 0116 hours. Station asserts transmission originates 72 hours ahead. Advises maintaining sealed door. Pressing the pencil so viciously into the paper that the graphite split in half, snapping with a sharp crack that made me flinch. I cursed under my breath and reached for another stub of pencil, fighting my own clumsy hands as the cold tightened the joints. Behind me, something shifted. The creak of a bunk, the soft thud of boots finding the floor. Sergeant Webb shuffled toward the latrine corner, scratching his jaw, his yawn a full-bodied, cavernous groan that rattled dust from the ceiling. "Cole," he muttered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "They're supposed to be listening for runners, not chatting someone's ear off. Tone it down." His irritation washed over me like background noise, meaningless against the storm building in my chest. I twisted toward him fast enough for my neck to crack. "Sarge," I whispered sharply, "you need to hear this." But he waved me off with a slug. "Not many souls in Brashes. I will make another bad sign. If I can get this love done. Let a man piss before you drag him into panic." He vanished into the shadows, and for a moment I stared into the darkness, as if expecting it to stare back. The flush of the steel drum latrine echoed, and right then the static thickened, almost as if responding to his voice. I jammed the headphones back on. "Station identifying as Corporal Cole. This is Echo 7 Actual. Clarify your origin. Over." For a heartbeat, the world went completely silent. Not static, not electrical hum, but a suffocating, unnatural quiet that made my ears ring from the absence of sound. Then the hum returned, followed by ragged breathing that I recognized instantly as my own, but older, strained, scraped raw. "You won't believe me," the voice said, panting as though bracing against something pressing in on all sides. "But you will remember this exact moment when you're here, when the lights fail, when the ground starts shaking. Matt, listen, you don't have long. Wake the others when the sergeant rises. And for God's sake, don't let him check the corridor. I did that. It's why you won't." The voice faltered, swallowed by static, as if someone clamped a hand over its mouth mid-sentence. I stiffened, looking toward the latrine. Webb wasn't even back yet. Cold sweat slid down my spine, soaking into my undershirt. "If you're me," I whispered into the mic, "prove it." There was a pause, heavy, thoughtful. before the voice let out a humorless, exhausted chuckle. "The burn scar on your left palm," it said. "You got it at St. Lo and that field stove slipped. Third day ashore. You pretended it didn't sting because Harris was watching." Every muscle in my chest clenched. No one alive had reason to recall that tiny detail but me. My throat tightened. "Okay," I murmured. "Keep talking." The voice drew a jagged breath. "The burst hasn't hit yet. 72 hours from your clock, they break through the tree line behind the ridge. You'll think it's just another push, a mortar pattern, maybe tanks, but the shaking isn't artillery. It's the door." Before I could respond, boots scraped behind me. Webb stepped out of the latrine, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Cold as a grave in here," he muttered. "Generator must be coughing again." "Coal, traffic?" I raised a hand for silence, and he narrowed his eyes. I keyed the mic again. "Future station, stand by. Personnel waking." The voice snapped back, frantic now. "Doesn't matter. Wake all of them. You don't understand. The thing that hits the door doesn't come from outside the bunker. It comes from..." A violent burst of static obliterated the sentence, slamming into my skull so hard I tore the headphones off with a gasp. Webb was at my side instantly. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. My heart thundered. "Interference," I lied, my voice too thin, too sharp. But before he could respond, the entire bunker shuddered. Not the rolling boom of artillery, but a thick, singular impact, like something flat and massive had slapped itself against the outer wall. Dust rained from the ceiling. A private bolted upright on his bunk with a choked gasp. Webb spun toward the door. "Everyone up, check that entrance. Cole, contact command." No, the word tore itself out of me, raw and much too loud. Every man turned. The red bulb above us swayed violently, swinging shadows across their faces. "Sarge, don't open it. Just wake." He stared at me, eyes narrowing. "Explain." I couldn't tell him the truth, not without being hauled off comms and labeled unstable. So I grasped for a lie wrapped close to reality. "Movement in the tunnel," I said. The hit came from inside. He hesitated long enough for a softer thud to follow. A scraping, metal against stone, as though something out there was dragging itself along the doorframe with slow, patient intent. Webb's jaw clenched, arms ready. Nobody approaches the threshold. Rifles lifted, breaths tightened. The scraping stopped. Silence swelled like a bruise. And then the radio flickered back to life for one last broken whisper. "Nat." The double-standing balls rain big for a woman had the break. When Barry hauled the door his feet, what you hear next isn't the sergeant. The frequency died, and then came 3 soft, deliberate knocks on the bunker door. The sound itself shouldn't have been terrifying. 3 soft taps, light enough that they barely disturbed the air. Yet in that bunker, those gentle knocks struck with more force than any artillery shell I'd ever heard, because they lacked everything human. No desperation, no haste, no force. They were measured, delicate, almost rehearsed, the kind of knock someone uses on a nursery door when trying not to wake a sleeping child. Every man in Echo 7 stiffened like a single organism holding its breath. The silence that followed seemed to thicken around us, as though the bunker itself had drawn in a long, uneasy inhale. The red bulb above us flickered once, casting the room into stuttering shadows, before settling again into its dim, bloody glow. Webb lifted his hand for silence, though not one of us could have spoken even if we tried. Our throats had cinched as tight as clamps. Every eye turned to that steel door, waiting for the next tap, each heartbeat a hammer inside our chests. I could feel the cold through the floorboards, like the temperature had dropped a degree with every second that passed. My headphones hung loose around my neck, the radio silent now, as though even the circuits were too frightened to carry a sound. Webb edged forward with deliberate caution, each step a whisper across concrete as he drew near, but not too near, to the door. The dim red light grazed one side of his face, sharpening the tension carved into his jaw. Beside him, Debsey moved quietly, rifle raised, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Outside the corridor, the world lay in a suffocating hush. No boots on the gravel, no wind funneling through the narrow approach, no distant voices muttering German or English, nothing but that dense, suffocating quiet. Then, 3 more taps, perfectly spaced, perfectly identical. Webb froze mid-step. Owens, who still had the face of someone too young for war, whispered shakily, "Sir, could that be one of ours?" His voice shook. Webb didn't answer. His silence was louder than any command. He tilted his head, listening, and that's when the next sound slid under the door. A voice, not speaking, mimicking. The same 3 taps but breathed out as broken syllables, as if someone, or something, was learning how to shape sound. Tap, 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 whispered in a wet, soft imitation that didn't belong in any human throat. Every hair along my arms rose like frost. Back, Webb snapped, voice low but sharp as a blade. Center of the room, weapons up, now! We scrambled away from the entrance, boots scraping, equipment rattling. The kind of frantic repositioning men only make when they know they are prey rather than predators. I stumbled into the radio table, nearly knocking the chair aside. My shaking hands grabbed the headphones, slamming cups over my ears, desperate for my future self's voice to return. But the frequencies were dead. No hum, no bleed through, no atmospheric noise. Just complete, impossible, suffocating silence. Radios are never silent. Even broken ones whisper, but this one had been swallowed whole. Behind me, Webb barked orders. Cole, find any station, division, artillery, recon, anything. I spun the dials, feeling dread bloom with every empty frequency. Nothing. It was like the entire outside world had been switched off. Then a new sound dragged itself along the outer corridor. A slow, scraping glide, metal against stone, like claws or steel tapping lightly as it moved. But no soldier dragged steel across the walls like that. The scrape slid up the doorframe, across the top hinge, paused, then drifted downward again. Someone whispered a prayer. Then a voice called from the corridor. Sergeant Webb, open up. It was Lieutenant Harris's voice, crisp, impatient, confident. The exact tone he used on the radio, the exact rasp from cigarettes, perfectly replicated. Webb stiffened. Lieutenant, he called, his tone wary. Yes, the voice replied. Open the door. That's an order. For a heartbeat, hope flickered in a few eyes, then died when I heard what was missing. Harris always used verification when giving commands near frontline positions, especially at night, always. And this voice had slipped past protocol like a thief. I swallowed hard. Sarge, that's not him. Webb shot me a sharp glance. And how would you know that? I forced myself to breathe. He'd give the verification phrase. He'd never skip it. Not now. A long pause. Webb nodded slowly. Lieutenant, he called. State verification. What followed wasn't silence. It was something worse. The voice outside the door stuttered, faltered, broke, like a machine struggling to piece its words together. Open the door, Sergeant, open. The tone garbled itself, fragments cracking and reassembling in wrong shapes. Owens whimpered and clutched his rifle to his chest. That ain't human, Dempsey whispered. The scraping stopped. Even the wind outside seemed to halt. Then a new sound came, not from the door, but from behind us, from the ventilation shaft. 3 taps, slow, deliberate, metallic. Webb spun. Positions, all sides, watch all sides. The tapping repeated, echoing down the shaft. Then metal groaned. Something was moving through the vent, bending the screws, bowing the grill. A shadow stretched behind the grate, long and wrong, like an arm with too many joints. Ho, Webb shouted. Call command, anyone. I tried, God, I tried. Ripping through frequencies with frantic speed. Every channel was a void. Then, faintly, a flicker of life. A static crackled. A weak signal clawed through. My future voice gasped through the noise, desperate. Matt, they're already inside. Block the vent. Don't let it. The signal ruptured into a harsh animal hiss. Behind me, the grill dented inward. Long, thin fingers, too many knuckles, too pale, too quiet, slipped through and tapped the metal 3 times, almost gently, as if greeting us. We're practicing. For a moment that stretched far too long, none of us dared even to blink, as that grotesque hand lingered in the vent, if it could even be called a hand at all. It looked sculpted from wax left too close to a flame, its surface smooth and pale and disturbingly soft-looking. Yet its fingers were impossibly long, jointed in too many places, bending with an unnatural grace that made my stomach twist. Each fingertip scraped against the metal grate with a careful curiosity, tapping in that same unnerving rhythm. 3 gentle clicks that now felt as deeply embedded in my skull as my own heartbeat. Owens dropped his rifle at the sound, the weapon clattering across the concrete like a grenade going off in the suffocating quiet, and the creature in the vent turned toward the noise in a slow, fluid motion, as though the sound intrigued it. Dempsey lunged, dragging Owens backward and away from the wall. Webb stepped forward, snapping his rifle upward, but even he looked uncertain, knowing that one straight trigger pull inside this confined bunker might be just as deadly to us as anything crawling through that vent. No one fires unless I say, he barked, voice tight with strain. We don't know what rounds will do in here. The hand drew back a fraction, then pushed forward again, fingers curling and uncurling as though testing the air, testing us. I stumbled back toward the radio table, heart pounding so hard I could feel each pulse in my fingertips. The headphones swung wildly as I lifted them to my head, desperate for the voice from the future to return, desperate for any guidance that might make sense of the nightmare unfolding before us. Static washed over me in thick, choking waves, nothing like the usual hiss. This was heavier, denser, like the creature's presence was bleeding into the frequency itself. Then, faintly, cutting through like a whisper through fog, my own voice slid into my ear. "Matt, listen." My breath hitched. "I'm here," I whispered. The voice trembled, weakened. "Seal the vent. It slips in through gaps, through the dark, through the thin places. Don't let it touch anyone. It learns." Learns? The word tore through my fear like a jagged blade. Learns what? Our voices? Our shapes? Our reactions? The creature's fingers twitched as if responding to the thought. Web snapped into motion before panic could completely root us. "Davis, Norton, the crate, block that den vent now." The two men scrambled for the heavy supply crate near the back wall, boots skidding over concrete as they shoved it toward the vent. As soon as the crate screeched across the floor, the creature reacted violently. The fingers retracted with a sudden whip-fast motion. Then another limb pushed through the vent, this one thicker, longer, bending like rope pulled taut. The grate bulged outward, screws snapping free and pinging across the floor. A gust of frigid air blasted through the opening, so cold it stung my cheeks. The red bulb overhead dimmed in a sickly pulse, as if the thing was drawing energy straight from the wires. Behind the vent, the darkness thickened, not the absence of light, but something deeper, a shifting void that made the air feel thinner, colder, wrong. The crate slammed against the vent with a thunderous thud, Davis and Norton throwing their full weight behind it. The creature's limb flattened impossibly, stretching like tar beneath the crate's edge, trying to slip under. Dumsey raised his rifle, face pale. "Sarge," he said hoarsely, "I can't let that thing get in here, ricochet or not." "Hold fire." Webb's voice cracked between authority and fear. "Just hold," the creature interrupted him. A sound poured from the vent, soft at first, then clearer. "Help me," Owen's exact voice. Same tremble, same drawl, same terrifying familiarity. Owen shrank backward, shaking violently. "No, no, it ain't me," he whispered. The whisper changed. It took Dempsey's voice next, then mine, then Webb's, cycling through each one with increasing precision, smoothing out imperfections as though practicing. Each imitation sharpened into something more confident, more polished, more horrifyingly accurate. It wasn't copying us, it was learning us. The radio erupted again, static crackling with desperate urgency. "Matt, seal it now," my future self shouted before dissolving into fragmented distortion. "Go," Davis roared, slamming his shoulder into the crate with everything he had. Norton followed, and the impact forced the creature's limb to twist violently before tearing back into the darkness with a sickening, wet recoil. The crate thudded into place, and the vent fell silent. For 3 whole seconds, no one breathed. Then, 3 soft knocks tapped from the opposite side of the bunker. All of us turned at once. The far concrete wall, solid, windowless, echoed with those 3 identical taps. A faint, almost friendly whisper followed, this time in my own voice. "Matt." I staggered back until I crashed into the radio table. Webb's breathing came fast, clouding the cold air in front of him. "Positions," he ordered, voice breaking under the strain. "It's moving along the structure. Watch every surface." The men spread out in a terrified, trembling line, rifles shifting from wall to floor to ceiling. And then the ground itself began to tremble. A deep vibration rising from beneath the concrete like the slow awakening of something massive. Not shelling, not footsteps, something older, something pushing upward. The radio sputtered, my future voice flickering through in a final broken warning. "It's testing. When it finds the weak door, get ready." The transmission snapped off. Before anyone could speak, the steel entrance door thundered under a sudden, monstrous impact, the hinges shrieking as if torn by something far too large to belong in any living world. The creature had circled back, and this time, it wasn't tapping. It was trying to break its way inside. The steel door jumped inward, under the force of the hit, the entire frame groaning, like it had taken a direct blow from a tank, rather than whatever waited on the other side. And the sound ricocheted around the bunker with a violence that turned every man rigid with terror. The red bulb overhead swung wildly, shadows slicing across the walls in frantic arcs that made the room feel smaller, tighter. like we were trapped inside a lung that was struggling to draw air. For the first time since I'd known him, Sergeant Webb's face cracked, not in fear of the enemy or the chaos outside, but with the raw understanding that something beyond the scope of soldiers or commands or wars was pressing against our door. A second impact followed, slower this time, a probing shove that made the metal flex with an agonizing groan, the hinges wailing like wounded animals. Owens fell backward, hands clamped over his ears, practically choking on his breath, while Dempsey pulled him upright. Webb steadied his rifle, though his eyes betrayed the doubt burning inside him. "No firing unless it breaks through," he said, voice shaking. "Ricochets have got us in here. It's not a German," I whispered before I could stop myself, the words tasting like ice. Everyone turned toward me with a mixture of dread and understanding, because none of this resembled anything human. The knocking stopped abruptly, leaving only the harshness of our ratted breathing. Then a faint dragging sound drifted from the corridor outside, slow, sweeping, like something massive was shifting its weight along the concrete. Owens exhaled shakily. "It's leaving." "No," I murmured. "It's repositioning." Webb's voice cut in, tight and controlled. "Cole, if you've got any idea what's happening, you better talk." I opened my mouth, ready to tell him the truth, ready to admit that I'd been warred by myself. But before I could speak, the radio erupted with a blast of static so violent it felt like someone had shoved needles into my ears. Every man jumped. I tore the headphones onto my head, desperate for guidance, desperate for my future voice to return. Through the storm of noise, words sputtered through, thin and distorted. "Mat, door, floor." It comes through the rest dissolved in a guttural warping moan. "Comes through what?" Norton shouted. The floor answered for me. A trembling wave rippled beneath our boots, rolling through the concrete like something alive and massive was shifting in the dark below. Dust trickled upward from the seams in the floor, upward, as if gravity had forgotten itself. The generator skipped a beat, its hum choking before stabilizing again. "Everyone off the center," Webb barked. "Move!" We stumbled toward the walls, just as a thin crack ripped through the middle of the floor, splitting open with the sound of stone tearing. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then a long, glistening finger slid through the opening, slick, black, bending wrong. Another followed, then another, writhing up toward open air like limbs of something climbing through a doorway just beneath the surface. Owen screamed. Norton raised his rifle. "Let me shoot it, please, God." Webb hesitated only a second before roaring, "Fire!" The bunker exploded with gunfire, muzzle flashes strobing orange against the walls, bullets sparking off stone and steel. The creature recoiled at the impacts, but not like anything wounded, more like it was adjusting, tasting the pressure. The fingers flattened, stretching across the floor like spilled oil. Then a voice rose from the creature itself, sharp and clear and horribly familiar. My voice. "Stop shooting." Every weapon faltered. The echo of gunfire died, leaving the soft chitter of settling dust. Webb tried to shout a reload order, but before he could finish, the floor ruptured wider, the concrete splitting with violent force that threw half the squad backward. The red bulb burst, showering sparks. Darkness rushed into the room like a living thing, and from inside that churning blackness, my voice again, layered with other voices, whispering in a low, coaxing chorus, "Let me in." When the red bulb shattered overhead, the bunker fell into a darkness so thick it felt like a weight settling over my face. A blindness that erased the room, the walls, even my own hands. The only trace of light came from the dim, wavering glow of the radio's vacuum tubes, their orange filaments flickering like dying embers on a hearth that had long since grown cold. Every man froze where he stood, breaths clamped tight inside their chests, as if drawing air might alert whatever was now lurking among us. Sound sharpened in the dark, tiny shifts, the hiss of settling dust. Our boots creaking as panic forced us to adjust our footing. Beneath all of it was something else, a slow, wet breathing, close enough that I felt the warmth of it brush across my cheek even though no one was standing beside me. Owens whimpered somewhere in the pitch black, not a scream, just a stifled, ragged breath that shivered through the room. Webb whispered for me to check the radio, his voice tight and strangled, but I was already fumbling through the dark, hands trembling as I found the tuning dial. The tubes pulsed faintly, illuminating the silhouettes of the squad, distorted shadows that looked barely human in the thin glow. I pressed the headphones to my ears. The static was strangled, thin, like a signal smothered beneath heavy cloth. I spun through every channel, division frequencies, artillery bands, emergency lines, nothing. Then, through the static, a whisper cracked through. A voice stretched thin, waterlogged, but undeniably my own. "Matt, it's inside already. Keep them together. It isolates." The voice drowned into a low, vibrating hum that rattled through my teeth, then vanished completely. "It learns," I breathed into the dark before I realized I'd spoken. "What?" Webb hissed. "Voices," I whispered. "Patterns. Fear. It learns us." Then a soft shift, cloth scraping concrete, a footstep. But every silhouette in the radio's glow remained frozen. I counted quickly. Webb, Dempsey, Davis, Norton, Owens. 6 men. 7, including me. But there were supposed to be 8. A new outline had formed near the door. A tall, rigid shape that hadn't been there before. Webb saw it the same moment I did. "Identify yourself," he whispered. The shape didn't move, didn't sway, didn't breathe. The tube's dim light barely outlined it. A human form sketched in shadow, but wrong in posture, too still, as if held upright by strings. Then it stepped forward, one slow, stiff motion. "Identify yourself," Webb repeated louder now. The figure tilted its head with a smoothness no living neck could match, then spoke in Owen's voice. "It's me, Sarge. Don't shoot." Owens choked on a sob. "That's not me," he whispered in a broken gasp. The figure twitched, its arm bending at an impossible angle before straightening again. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes carving grotesque snapshots of the figure into orange silhouettes. Skin stretched over shapes that didn't belong. Its face half formed into mine. Bullets tore through it with wet thuds, but the creature didn't fall. It kept advancing. I stumbled back, hitting the radio table hard enough for the headset to clatter off. The bunker filled with screams, ricochets snapping past our ears like snapping bones. Norton crying out as a bullet grazed his leg. Then the floor cracked again, the fissure widening with a raw, splitting roar. Something massive surged upward, a black mass writhing like shadow-given muscle. The mimic froze, as though the thing beneath the floor commanded it. Webb shouted for us to fall back to the generator wall. We scrambled, slipping in dust and empty casings, as the mimic snapped its head toward the vent, listening. Then 3 soft taps came from above, echoing through the ceiling beams. Owens broke. He bolted toward the corridor, sobbing, boots pounding in blind terror. The shadow mass moved faster. A tendril of darkness shot up, sweeping through the room like a whip. Owens was lifted off his feet, cut off mid-scream, and dragged screaming into the black crack before any of us could raise a rifle. His weapon clattered to the floor as the fissure sealed shut around him, leaving nothing but silence. A dead, suffocating silence that lasted only a moment before we all heard it again. 3 soft taps coming from somewhere in the dark. The creature wasn't done, and it wasn't alone. For long, suffocating seconds after Owens vanished into that closing fissure, none of us could move or even summon the breath to speak. It felt as though the entire bunker had turned into a sealed coffin sinking into the earth, trapped beneath the crushing awareness that whatever hunted us wasn't bound to doors or walls or flesh. The faint glow bleeding from the generator's failing tubes flickered weakly across twisted shadows. Davis pressed against the wall with his helmet scraping concrete, Norton clutching his wounded leg with a jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Dempsey sweeping his rifle in shaking arcs through darkness that swallowed every edge of the room, and Webb standing rigid, locked on the crack as though expecting it to open again at any second. I hovered near the radio table, hands trembling against the cold metal, hoping, begging, for the static to return, for future me to speak again, for something to anchor this nightmare back into the realm of war, instead of whatever monstrosity had crawled into our reality. But the line stayed dead. Even the faint electrical hum had vanished, devoured by the same presence that had claimed Owens. Then the mimic, the warped, half-formed version of my shape, turned its stolen face toward the room. It didn't dissolve or retreat. It simply stood there near the entrance, its posture stiff and puppet-like, its head bending too smoothly, as if the bones beneath the skin were arranged for a different creature entirely. Slowly, it lifted its right hand. The limb moved with a creak like old rope pulled taut, and then it tapped 3 times against its own chest. Tap, tap, tap. That same rhythm that had become a curse stitched into the bunker's air. "Don't move," Webb whispered, though none of us had the strength to disobey. The creature stepped forward in silence, absorbing sound instead of making it. The generator's glow dimmed further, rhythms of the machine weakening, as though the thing was drinking the energy out of the air. Norton's breaths grew faint. Even the ringing in my ears from gunfire dissolved into a strange, smothered hush. The creature wasn't just mimicking us. It was erasing the world around us, replacing it with its own rules. its own silence. Dempsey fired, muzzle flash lighting up the mimic's face in a series of awful snapshots. My features sculpted into a hollow mask, eyes empty sockets of shifting shadow. Bullets tore through its torso, flinging dark fluid into the air. But the creature didn't slow. It advanced with jerking, puppet-like steps, limbs snapping into shape with unnatural smoothness. Back, Webb shouted, pushing us toward the generator wall. We stumbled across dust and fallen casings, the mimic turning its head toward the ceiling as if listening for orders. Then 3 saw taps echoed overhead. A woman's voice followed, calm, familiar, crisp, and utterly impossible. "Corporal Cole," it called gently, the voice sliding through the air like a knife dipped in warm water. Step forward, my blood iced. No one else in that bunker had ever heard that voice. Not here, not in this war, not in this reality. And yet it spoke my name as though I had been hearing it my whole life. Dempsey whispered, trembling. Who the hell is that?" I couldn't answer. My legs felt locked in place, rooted to the concrete. The mimic turned toward the ceiling again, like an obedient dog listening for its master. The voice returned, layered now, multiplied, coming from ceiling, walls, floor. "Matthew, step forward." The radio sparked. A sudden burst of static cut through the room, and my future voice tore through the noise, gasping with effort. "Matt, don't move. Don't listen. It's not her. It's not anyone. You're alone. His words snapped off, like the line had been crushed mid-syllable. Webb grabbed my shoulder. "Cole, don't move. Don't answer it." Before I could reply, the mimic lunged. It collapsed inward and expanded outward at the same time, its limbs folding like liquid shadow before snapping forward with terrifying precision. It slammed into the generator wall, dents bursting through the metal casing, as a spray of sparks lit the bunker in a violent strobe. For a heartbeat, we saw the creature clearly, a corpse-like reflection of us all, stitched together in shifting layers of shadow and flesh that didn't obey the rules of shape. Its mouth tore open, without stretching its stolen lips, and my own voice poured out, pleading, "Open the door, Matt, please." It reached out toward me. Then the floor split wide beneath it with a bone-shattering crack. Darkness surged upward like a living tide, wrapping around the creature's limbs and dragging it downward. It screamed in a dozen stolen voices, mine, Owens's, Webb's, all tangled together, as it carved gouges into the concrete while being pulled into the depths. The fissure slammed shut with a final grinding thud. Silence collapsed over the bunker. Heavy, absolute, final. Then, from somewhere far below, 3 soft taps echoed back up to the floor. "This is Captain Rebel, signing off. Stay sharp, stay breathing, and whatever you do, don't answer the knock."